Welcome to NAFI's third edition to the 10-question challenge with my special guest today, Tom Turner. Tom is the executive director of the American Bonanza Society's Air Safety Foundation. He's a CFI, MEI, ATP. He was 2008's Central CFI of the Year, inductee to the National Flight Instructor Hall of Fame. He's an Air Force veteran and the creator of the Mastery Flight Training digital newsletter. He's been a CFI since 1988, which roughly equates to about 33 years of flight instruction. Tom, welcome today.
Thanks, John. I appreciate you asking me to be here.
I'm so excited, and I figure we'll just get right into it.
Okay.
Our first question today is, was flight instructing part of your original career plan, or was it something you never anticipated doing?
Well, I don't think anyone's final career is what they anticipated doing from the very beginning. I kind of fell into this. Like a lot of folks, I wanted to be a professional pilot. I joined the Air Force hoping to fly. The Air Force had other ideas, but during my tenure there, I decided I did want to get out when I was done and pursue a career as a commercial pilot. And I learned two things in the Air Force. One was that I like systems and scenario-based instruction, which frankly wasn't terribly common in the civilian world at that time in the 1980s. And two, that while there and afterward, as I started to work on my certificates and ratings later, I like to teach. And so fairly early in my career, I decided that in one form or another, I was going to be a flight instructor for my entire career.
Excellent. So, reflecting on your instructor skills with your first student, how do you think you did?
Well, I haven't read about them in the NTSB, so that's a plus. I think I probably did an adequate job of preparing that student and did a little bit more than what the old practical test standards had maybe called for at the time. I had an interesting experience myself while I was a student pilot where I was flying a Cessna 152 and I hit a bug with my pitot tube. Now, I defy anyone to try to purposely do that on downwind, but of course that made the airspeed indicator wildly inaccurate. And I had decided that before I ever soloed anybody, they would have to be able to demonstrate the ability to fly the entire traffic pattern with the airspeed indicator covered up. So I tried to throw things in there like that. So perhaps, if I'm lucky, maybe I prepared the pilot a little bit better than the minimums. But I also often joke that I really ought to go look at about the first 20 names in my logbook and offer them a free redo.
That's a good sentiment. I suppose I should probably look at the same. So most of us have had an instructor mentor who helped us learn the ropes. Who was yours, and what was the most meaningful thing they taught you?
All right. Well, that's a real challenge because when I earned my flight instructor certificate, my CFI moved on to another instructional position with an airline. And so I suddenly found myself to be the only practicing full-time flight instructor in about 50 miles. So I kind of made it up as I went along. Mm-hmm. 2 years later, I got hired by Flight Safety International and became part of a training program in Wichita in beach airplanes. And my supervisor there, Nick Frisch, really was the first hands-on or first real mentor I had as a flight instructor. And I think probably the most important thing I learned from Nick was that we all need to aim to be as knowledgeable and precise as possible. Precision is what we're aiming for. And if you train to be a precise pilot, then meeting the minimum standards of what are now the ACS is a piece of cake. So I think Nick is probably the greatest single influence on my instructional philosophy, which is try to just do your best at all times.
Sure. What was the most valuable non-aviation skill you learned from being a flight instructor?
It's got to be communications. Although I've turned it all back around into the instructional career that I've developed. I've always been fairly good at writing, but I've found that I really have a niche for that. I have a developed a skill for that. And it started as a flight instructor. I was being an Air Force Strategic Air Command trained retentive person. I created these extensive written briefings for my students that I thought everybody did that, right? And so I got pretty good at explaining technical things in what turns out to be a fairly simple way. So I think that learning how to better communicate both verbally and especially in writing are the two greatest skill enhancements I've learned as a flight instructor that are not directly related to aviation.
Absolutely, and that's an art. It's not an easy thing to learn.
Well, there are different skill sets, and the skill set that makes a pilot an exceptional flight instructor is not the same skill set that makes that person a good communicator necessarily in non-aviation ways. And so being able to develop those things as well will have a really good enhancement effect on your career, whether it's as a flight instructor or something else.
Absolutely. It's one of the many hats that instructors wear that really isn't covered underneath the initial instruction test.
That's right.
So what do you enjoy most about flight instruction then?
Well, that's an easy one for me because I like to see when the light comes on. When somebody looks at you and says, that's easy. There are a lot that, it's comparatively easy to fly an airplane. But to use your term, it really is an art as well as a science, but it's really an art to fly an airplane well. And most pilots, in my experience, my career has been almost exclusively with pilots who are not in the commercial pilot career path. So I'm dealing with owner pilots and business pilots and people who fly recreationally. And most of them don't practice to get the maximum performance out of their airplane. And when you can show them not only is your airplane capable of doing this thing, but that you are capable of making it do this thing, and that light goes on, that's what I really, really like as an instructor.
It's funny. One of the whole points of this video series is to look at the commonalities for these answers. And that is something that keeps reoccurring with each one of these that I do it's just the smile that all of my guests have when they go, oh man, when they finally understand something, when the light goes on, when it finally clicks and they go, oh my gosh, this isn't half as hard as I thought it was.
Yeah. And
I finally understand it.
Yeah. And as an instructor, you'll agree, you get much more than you give. If you learn so much as a flight instructor from your students.
Yeah.
And also in preparing for your students.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what is the most interesting, scary, or fun story you've had with a student?
Oh gosh. I have a story, and hopefully I'll get through it pretty quickly. It's not so much scary, it's instructive, and it goes to the personality trait of impulsivity. I was instructing with a pilot in a fairly experienced pilot in a Beech Baron, twin engine piston airplane. And we were preparing him for his commercial pilot certificate. And one of the things that you have to do is the VMCA demonstration. For those that are not multi-engine rated, basically you're demonstrating that on one engine with the other engine simulated inoperative, there is a minimum speed at which you have enough airflow to maintain control effectiveness so that you can resist the airplane's tendency to deviate from its flight path as a result of this engine failure. And so there's this maneuver that you teach, and it's demonstrated on check rides to slow the plane down to the point where it just begins to lose directional control. Well, I had briefed this pilot that we are going to begin the recovery from this at the first of one of several signs. One is the loss of directional control. The second is reaching full control deflection. Third would be any indication of a stall. And fourth would be anything that leads us to believe that the other engine is not working properly. So we're flying along, doing this thing at a safe altitude, and all of a sudden, and you always do this with the left engine shut down because that's the critical engine, and that's what we always do.
Right.
Not shut down, but it simulated at zero thrust or zero power. And the right engine, all of a sudden the right engine quits for real. And in these airplanes, you have an auxiliary fuel pump and you turn it on, and that will, if the engine-driven pump has failed, the engine will restart. And that's exactly what happened. And he did a good job with that. But what became an issue of impulsivity was that this pilot had transitioned from a Piper Aztec, I believe, into this airplane. In an Aztec, you turn the fuel boost pumps on and leave them on for takeoff and landing. In a Baron, the system is different. And if you have the fuel pump turned on when the engine-driven pump is working normally, the engine will flood and quit.
Oh.
So he had been trained very well when he transitioned into the Baron that he needed to make sure that his boost pumps were turned off for descent, make sure that the boost pumps were turned off when entering the pattern, and make sure that the boost pumps were turned off on final approach. His instructor had gone out of his way to instill this habit to transition him from the old airplane to the new one. So we're coming in here, the engine driven, both engines are working fine. We decided we're done with this training session. We're going to go land the airplane. We actually flew a non-precision approach in the middle of all this. And he set up for the approach, and then he just reaches over there and turns off the boost pump on the right engine. And all of a sudden the right engine quits again. And it was like, what are you doing? And to his credit, oh yeah, I need to turn that back on. So we break out of the clouds. This particular approach required a circle to land maneuver, high ceiling, not a problem, but we cross over midfield, turn on downwind. He reaches over there again, and he's ready to turn off the boost pump, and I slap his hand out of the way. And then on final approach, I was ready for him. I had my hand over the boost pump, and he hit my hand. He was so well trained, if you will, that he was allowing himself to impulsively reach over and turn that without thinking about the consequences. And that taught me how incredibly locked into a way of thinking we can be, even if it's the result of good training in this case, if in this particular scenario, that's the wrong thing to do. Mm-hmm. And so now I have to watch for that in myself. And I use this in a much longer discussion. I use this real world scenario as a way of reminding people that systems instruction is extremely important. And before you move any switch, you have to know exactly what the outcome of that is going to be. So.
Absolutely. And it's also a lesson in the law of primacy and how
Yes.
much that can affect a person without them even realizing it.
Exactly. And we got on the ground and he said, I have no idea why I did that. Yeah.
It's certainly a lesson learned, I suppose.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So in your mind, what quality or skill makes for an exceptional flight instructor?
You have to really love it. You have to love teaching flying airplanes. So many instructors, we have, as an industry, we have sometimes a reputation, and it's not always well-deserved. We have a reputation of being a bunch of time builders who do to the minimum to get pilots to the, and I don't think that exists nearly as much as people would think, but that reputation is out there. And even if you're only going to be in this flight instructional role for a fairly short period of time on your way to whatever your eventual career goal might be, during the time you're in there, you need to focus on what you're doing and be a good communicator. And the most important skill is the ability to communicate what you're doing, detect how your student is receiving that information, and then adjusting your way of presenting it if you need to so that they understand and their light goes on.
Yeah, I completely agree. Good. So what aspect of flight instruction best prepared you for what you do professionally now?
Well, probably the communication skills, and one of the most, strangely enough, one of the most important things in my career has familiarity with regulations, and even more so with the process of looking things up to get definitive answers. And I've done all sorts of strange detours in my career. While being a flight instructor, I've sold aircraft insurance. I was an OSHA compliance person. I managed a small fleet of Beech Barons for a while. I was a production test pilot. I do this, but more than all of the time, I know how to look things up. And people have actually sought me out for particular jobs because, hey, I flew with you and I know that you know how to access and deliver information, and you're not afraid to say, I don't know that, but I'm going to find out where it is. And the answer isn't on Facebook. The answer is somewhere in a manual or a regulation or a document, because a lot of thought went into those. That just being familiar with this code of operations that is represented by all of the manuals and everything that we have has been a big part of being able to build my career to where I am now.
Well, and as a piggyback to the previous question, how did you utilize the time that you spent as a CFI to leverage that into what you do now?
Oh, okay. Mainly personal contacts and secondary, and some of that in person and much of that through writing. I started doing quite a bit of writing fairly early in my career. Now, I did a lot of writing in college. My first published article was before I ever became a pilot. Had nothing, well, it actually did have something to do with aviation, but it was mainly historical information. Mm-hmm. Making contacts in that way, and over a long period of time, having made enough contacts and learning enough from other people as well, reading what they write, starting to be seen as an authority, a go-to person. And this goes back, as you said, to that earlier question also, because a lot of that comes from the ability to locate definitive information and then to deliver that in a way that's understandable to someone. So, you can write about short field landings by copying and pasting out of the airplane flying manual, or you can use your personal experience as a flight instructor, having taught several pilots to do this, to describe it in a way that will resonate with someone who is having difficulty trying to learn that task. And that's the difference. And so it all wraps up together. The ability to communicate I think, is what makes me a better flight instructor than I would be otherwise. And that's also what's opened up various positions and contacts along the way for me.
Sure. Final question. If you could give a new instructor one piece of advice for success in the profession, what would that be?
If you want to be a career flight instructor, specialize. That's what I've done. I mean, I'm kind of the beach guy. I've been teaching beach airplanes for 30 of those 33 years. Now, you need to have a certain amount of flexibility because things change. Your specialty might be avionics, in which case you're going to be changing your emphasis every 4 or 5 years probably. Mm-hmm. But if you become seen as the specialist in avionics, people will seek you out for flight instruction. I've had to modify that. When I was first teaching, I was the NDB king. I developed a technique for teaching non-directional beacon approaches, ADF, using the ADF without a slave compass card. I learned that I could do that. I ended up training the Air Force helicopter pilot contingent at the base I used to be based at, because I could do that. Well, that was a pretty perishable skill in retrospect, but I was a specialist there. Then I specialized in something else. Find something that you are particularly good at and learn how to teach it, and people will come to you to want to learn.
I think that's excellent advice. Tom, I'm so grateful that you took the time to talk to us today. I know you've got a bunch of projects, one of them being the Mastery Flight Training digital newsletter. If one of our viewers wasn't subscribed to that, how would they go ahead and do that?
Well, it's mastery-flight-training. So, dashes in there, masteryflighttraining.com. if you go to the website, or you could Google Flying Lessons Weekly, you'll probably find it. Go to the Mastery Flight Training website. There's a free subscription button in the upper left corner, and there you have it. You'll get the reports that come out, usually Wednesday nights, U.S. Central Time, and almost every week.
Excellent. Is there anything else you want to tell our viewers?
Well, I really appreciate being asked to be part of this. John, you have done tremendous things with education with NAFI over the last several years with the professional development program. That's an incredible resource for NAFI members, and something that's not available anywhere else. So I want to recognize you for doing that. And you have been sort of the there are a lot of people associated with NAFI, the board members, staff members, and such. You have been a driving force in improving the member services available through the organization, and really helping to notch up the professional education that it provides. So thanks a lot, John.
Well, thank you, sir. And as far as the professional development program is concerned, Tom has been a presenter for several courses in that program. We thank you so much for that.
Oh,
and again, thank you for your time, and have a great day.
All right, you too, John. Thanks.